Howdy my totally tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. And today we got another fighting game ranking for you. For the week of EVO, we're talking fighting games, and today we're talking Street Fighter. Now Street Fighter, it doesn't need an introduction, does it? It's the most popular, biggest fighting game franchise of them all. No other fighting game series has had the impact that Street Fighter has had, not on just the fighting game genre, but video games in general. Like, Street Fighter is just incredibly iconic, still going strong, been going strong like 35 years now, and sees no sign of stopping. And you know, over the years there's been a lot of Street Fighter games. Like, there's been a lot of versions of Street Fighter games, but just actual games, there's been a lot of Street Fighter games. And today we're going to be ranking them all worst to best. We're going to be giving them all a little review. I have played every Street Fighter game. I haven't played every version of every game, but I've played every Street Fighter game. So yeah, we're going to be talking about all of them. We're going to be talking about the main games, which I talked about a while back, but we're also going to be talking about all the spin-offs too, because there's a number of spin-offs that the Street Fighter series has seen. In fact, there's more spin-offs and non-numbered entries than numbered entries in this series, but we're looking at all of them. We're looking at all the spin-offs that the Street Fighter series has been a part of, even like the weird platformers. I've played them all, and I'm going to be talking about all of them for you. We're going to be ranking them based off of their quality, how well they've aged, are they easy to pick up and play nowadays, are they crazy stiff and unplayable, is the game fun? How are the mechanics? Is it super in-depth? Yada yada yada. You know how it goes. I am no fighting game aficionado. I am not a pro. I am a pretty casual player. I just play these games for fun. I've played all of them for fun. I mess around with my friends. And I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm some be-all, end-all. I'm sure there are plenty of videos that go really in-depth for like an hour for each game about why each game's mechanics are good or bad, etc. I'm not trying to do that. This is just my opinion. We're just having a good old time looking at all the Street Fighter games. And so if you don't agree with me or you think that I'm totally wrong, let me know down below. Or if you agree with me, let me know down below. As always, like, share, subscribe for big-ass lists. We got a Patreon going in here. This intro's been going on long enough. Let's just get right into it. Now, out of every Street Fighter game, what is the worst Street Fighter game? It's pretty obvious, but what is the worst one? And so here we have the original Street Fighter releasing all the way back in '87. It really shouldn't be a shock that one of the weakest Street Fighter games is the original. The original Street Fighter, you know, it established a lot of things that would be very prevalent to the series, but if you come back in the modern day and try this game, you are going to have a hard time with it because this game has not aged well at all. You know, I get it. It was one of like the very first fighting games, and so I wouldn't have expected it to age all that well, but playing it nowadays is very, very rough. Don't get me wrong, it was innovative and it established a bunch of conventions that would become standard in later fighting games, like the use of command-based special moves or the 6-button controls, but if you play this game nowadays, you'll immediately see what I'm talking about when I say that the game is rough. The biggest thing I'm going to bring up is the controls. This game is very, and I mean very stiff. Like, really freaking stiff. This is like the stiffest fighting game I've ever played, and you know, I played like the original Fatal Fury games. Nope, this is even stiffer than that. Like, inputting any kind of command, just really doing any kind of attack, it is a chore. It is a hassle to do anything in this game. It is the opposite of fluid. It is a solid. Like, it is a solid pain in the ass to move in this game is what it is, and controlling this game is just not fun. Controlling Ryu, I will say, is you can only actually play as Ryu in the single player. If there's a second player, then you can actually play as Ken, but yeah, it's either Ryu or Ken. They have some special moves, but it is just a pain in the ass to do anything in this game, and you basically have a bunch of one-on-one boss fights. That's really what it is. It's more of like a boss gauntlet than an actual fighting game, and like, the damage meters are all over the place. You do a ton of damage with the special moves. Forget any regular moves. The special moves just destroy. And this game, you know, it's not messing around either. It's really difficult, and most of it is the controls as to why it's difficult, but the enemies, the bosses, really, they'll just whoop your ass also. And there's a bunch of characters here that would be iconic in later Street Fighter games, but it's cool to see where they all got their start here. And yeah, that's just kind of how I feel about the game. You know, it's cool to see where it got its start, but there is no reason, like no reason, you should play the original Street Fighter in the modern day. I mean, if you want to play a bad joke on somebody, you challenge them to Street Fighter 1 and SF6, but other than that, no. Do not play the original Street Fighter. It has just been obliterated by time. Its own series has even obliterated it. And so here we have the very strange Street Fighter 2010 The Final Fight releasing for the NES in 1990. Now this game is nothing, and I mean nothing like Street Fighter. In fact, honestly, I have no idea why this is even called Street Fighter to begin with. It is so far removed from everything that Street Fighter is known for. It's not even a fighting game, it's actually a platformer. You play as allegedly Ken in 2010 when he has cybernetic implants, and it's about his partner Troy being murdered and Ken seeking revenge, I guess. It's something stupid like that. Like, this plot makes no sense, and I have no idea how this is Ken or why they implemented Ken of all characters. No, this just doesn't even make any sense. So when it comes to the actual gameplay, like I said, it is a platformer, a not very good platformer that sees you playing as Ken, and the objective of each stage is to destroy the designated enemy target shown before the stage begins and obtain the energy required to open a trans-dimensional portal to the next stage. That really sounds like Street Fighter, doesn't it? You even get time limits in these levels because that always makes everything more fun. Ken can't exactly do much in this game. Like, he could do more in the original Street Fighter than this game. But he does have some moves, and you'll go through some levels, and that's pretty much the game. Look, I didn't play a ton of this game. I was like, what even is this game? And looking back, what even was this game? Why did they put the Street Fighter name on it? If they put a different name for this game, maybe it was Bionic Commando, or maybe it's just a new IP altogether, I don't think this game would have been as ignored as it was. It's actually incredibly difficult also. Like, I was really struggling with this one. Like, a lot of NES games are hard, and this game, it's one of those. It's one of those really hard NES games that isn't honestly worth playing nowadays. Like, even if you're morbidly curious about it, I don't think this game is really worth trying under any circumstances. There's just so many other better Capcom games for the NES and other platformers that are absolutely still worth playing on the NES. This is not one of them, and I really still just don't know why they made this Street Fighter. This should not have been Street Fighter. But then I guess I wouldn't have a reason to talk about it. So, Street Fighter 2010, everyone. And so here we have Street Fighter EX3 releasing for the PS2 in 2000. This game was not developed by Capcom, but rather Eureka. And I'll be real, while I thought EX was interesting at first, you know, a 3D Street Fighter, by the third game, I was like, I don't know about this one. And trying it nowadays, yeah, there's a reason so many people do not talk about EX3. So I guess the first thing to bring up is the 3D. Now the 3D in this game, yeah, it does not look good. Like, this was a PS2 launch title, and this game really doesn't look any better than the PS1. The models and animation just straight up do not look good, and the environments also don't look good. Now keep in mind, Tekken Tag Tournament also was a PS2 launch title, and that game looks significantly better than this one and animates significantly better as well. Like, this game, I wouldn't be surprised if it used just a bunch of the same animation from EX2. It looks like it honestly does. It just looks really stiff and clunky, and it's probably one of the reasons people thought Street Fighter and 3D just doesn't work together until Street Fighter 4 came out and proved everyone wrong. And then we get to the gameplay. Like, this gameplay is incredibly similar to Street Fighter EX2, and I didn't think EX2 played all that great. I thought it was just okay, and this game, you know, it just doesn't feel like they really improved on anything. You get to choose two characters, and you can switch mid-fight like Tekken Tag Tournament, only Tekken Tag Tournament has, you know, much better tagging mechanics and just all around is a better fighting game, but it's something you can do here. The guard break is gone. Instead we have this surprise blow, but really it's not all that different. In fact, the gameplay, even with these little changes, again, it's just so similar to EX2, which I thought was like okay at best. I don't think this game is any better than EX2 in terms of its gameplay, and I think from a sequel you should expect it to play a little better. This game just feels tired. It just feels tired, like they ran out of ideas. Or maybe they weren't done cooking and they just pushed it out because they wanted it to launch with the PS2. Like, it just doesn't feel like enough of an improvement over EX2 to even be worth playing, honestly. Like, the character roster is like exactly the same outside of two new characters. And the other thing worth mentioning is EX2 wasn't some huge hit. It wasn't some mega classic that people loved and Capcom just kind of pushed out another one that was basically the same. No, EX2 was like okay at best, and here we are getting basically the same game again with some minor tweaks. Yeah, no, I'm not really interested, and I don't think you should be either. There's a reason this game is just totally forgotten. I know over the years a number of people have gone back and said, oh, EX3 is actually pretty decent, you know, a lot of people didn't like it then and give it a chance, but it's actually alright. I don't know about that one. Even nowadays, I've just never really been a big fan of this game, and I just think it's nothing special. You could do better in the EX series and way better in the Street Fighter series, and I'd recommend almost every Street Fighter game over this one. And so here we have Street Fighter EX2 originally releasing in 1998. The game, as the title implies, is a sequel to Street Fighter EX, the 3D spin-off of the Street Fighter series. And this game, it's just alright. To be as reductive as possible, this game really is just Street Fighter EX with the addition of Excel combos and a few new characters. And so what are Excel combos? It's basically just the custom combos from Street Fighter Alpha. But outside of that, the gameplay is virtually identical to Street Fighter EX1. It feels really the same. It doesn't feel any better or worse. It controls just fine. It's not super stiff, but it doesn't have a very good feel to it. The pacing, the speed, and the general flow of these fights, it's okay, but it's just okay. I'd rather have this though than any of those 3D SNK games, but you line this up against Virtua Fighter or any Tekken game and it just kind of gets obliterated. And the same kind of goes for the graphics. The graphics in this game are not so hot. It's obviously very blocky and the animation is okay for the time. It wasn't like amazing, at least the music's pretty decent. It even got a physical CD release, so that's kinda cool. Now when it comes to this game's characters, it's very similar to EX1, you know, a number of characters return. There's actually some original characters here, which is interesting to see. One of them is named Crackerjack, no relation to the food unfortunately, but the character roster, I mean, it's alright, and then the later version of this game, EX2 Plus, it adds even more characters. I mean, right there's basically EX's 3 roster, so I guess it was actually pretty solid. Look, EX2, it's not terrible, it's not bad, but it's not really good either. It just kind of sits in the middle. It exists, it's alright. I don't got much to say about it. I've never really had much fun with this game, but I've never hated it either. It's just very middle of the road for me, and I don't know if I could really recommend it. I'd say you should probably try just about any other Street Fighter game. And so here we have a really interesting one. Here we have Street Fighter X Mega Man releasing for the PC in 2012. So this game is a pretty interesting development cycle. It was actually originally created by a Singaporean fan, but then Capcom saw it and went, oh shit, this is actually pretty good. We're gonna help you out with this and get it publicly released on like our website. And so they helped out a little bit, and yeah, it was released as a free download, not on Steam, but like their website. And you can still very much download it and play it today, even with a controller. And so the game is, as the title implies, Street Fighter crossing over with Mega Man. This is very much a Mega Man game though, rather than a Street Fighter game. It has the Street Fighter name in it, which is why I'm including it here, but it's very much a Mega Man game where you choose one of the 8 robot masters. Here though, it's all the Street Fighter characters, and then you go through a level that, you know, is reminiscent of the character's theme, and then finally you fight the character. And when fighting the character, it's very much a Mega Man fight where there's the whole rock, paper, scissors dynamic with the abilities. You're dodging them left and right. There's actually patterns here, and some of these Street Fighter characters are just going to wipe the floor with you. They're doing shit that you are going to have a hard time dodging. And honestly, this is a tough game. Like, Mega Man has always been challenging, especially the ones on NES. A lot of those are very difficult, but this game, yeah, it is not messing around. It is no problem kicking your ass. Some of these levels are tough. The end of the game is hard, and then the not robot masters that are Street Fighter characters, yeah, they're just gonna wipe the floor with you. They will just kick your ass, and unless you know their weakness and really get decent at recognizing their patterns, you're just not gonna beat the game. The game is challenging, which is good. When it comes to the aesthetic and the music, it's all Mega Man-ized, and you know, there's some good renditions here actually for the Street Fighter characters. And the game absolutely looks like a Mega Man game on NES, which is always good in my opinion. I mean, Mega Man was always at his best on the NES. The real question is this game even worth playing nowadays? Maybe, it depends. If you love Mega Man, you like Street Fighter, then I think it's worth a download. I mean, the game is free, so really what it comes down to is time investment. Do you want to play this game? Do you want to put some time into this game? It's not exactly a long game, especially if you're half decent at Mega Man, but again, if you like Street Fighter, if you like Mega Man, especially if you like old school Mega Man and you're looking for just more, I think this is a good one. But if you're just a Street Fighter fan and you just love Street Fighter and fighting games, you could probably skip this one since it's not a fighting game, it's a Mega Man game, and yeah, it's just kind of weird that's even on this list. Anyway. And so here we have Street Fighter EX releasing originally in '96, so this was the first Street Fighter game to ever have 3D graphics. And honestly, out of all the EX games, this is the one I would rather play the most. Sure, the other games might feel a little smoother and have more characters, but I just think the original EX was the best one. It also was the most novel, especially for the time. This was the first time that these characters were being rendered in 3D, and graphically, you know, it does look a bit weird, but I think it still looks alright. Some of the animation is rather stiff and it looks on par with like Virtua Fighter, but I'd rather look at this than any of those ugly ass 3D Samurai Showdown games, so there is that. So when it comes down to the fighting mechanics, it's all right here. The game is not as fast as say Darkstalkers or any of the Super Street Fighters or Alphas or any of those. It is 3D versus the sprites, so you know the speed had to be altered a little bit. When you jump and land, yeah, it is quite a bit slower, but I still think the pacing of the fights, it's alright. The game still absolutely does play like a Street Fighter game. Like special moves and supers are done the same way as they would be done in any other Street Fighter game. If you know how to play as Ken or Ryu in the other games, you're going to know how to play as them here. One thing that is different is how supers are done in this game. The EX series does feature a super meter with 3 separate sections rather than levels, which is unique and it's its own thing. It doesn't really change all that much though. Another mechanic this game has is the guard break, which is where you can actually break the guard and make the opponent dizzy, and then you can just totally wail on them. This is also in like Street Fighter Alpha, but here you actually like full on stun them and everything, and you could just pummel the shit out of them. The fighting in this game doesn't have as much depth as the other Street Fighter games. It's not as fun, it's not as fast paced, it's not as pretty as the other Street Fighter games, but what you have here is a decent little fighter. At least the music slaps. Like the music is actually really good in this game. It's like my favorite of the EX games. Like, damn, that music's really good. So we haven't talked about the characters yet, let's talk about them. This game does have 23 characters in the home release, and you know, a bunch of these characters are Street Fighter mainstays, but there's actually a decent amount of new characters introduced here as well, like Crackerjack, like Skullomania, and while I'm not going to say, you know, it's one of the best rosters Street Fighter's ever had, it really goes to show that the other EX games didn't really improve much on this original roster. Like they added just a couple characters here and there for each release. The original roster was actually decent. And you know, I think this game is actually decent. Out of all the EX games, this is really the only one that I can say it's actually worth trying. You might really like something here. It's different. It doesn't play like all the other Street Fighter games, and if you're looking for a more traditional game, you should just stay away from it, but it's different, it's fun, it's unique, and most importantly, it's got a bitchin' bangin' ass soundtrack. And so here we have X-Men vs. Street Fighter releasing originally in '96. Now this game really is the follow-up to both of those Marvel fighting games and throws Street Fighter into the mix. And this is really when the Marvel vs. Capcom series got started. This was obviously a much smaller scale than all of Marvel versus all of Capcom, but it still is that same idea of it being just a crazy crossover with a bunch of combos and teams and that fast-paced gameplay that the series really has become iconic for. Anything resembling a plot or a premise or anything like that, yeah, that's gone. We don't really need a reason as to why the X-Men are fighting Street Fighter characters though, do we? When it comes to the roster, we have 17 characters, you know, not the strongest in terms of number, but it's still a decent little roster with some of the fan favorites on the Street Fighter side and some good iconic X-Men characters like Wolverine, Sabretooth, Magneto, Juggernaut, etc. Look, the roster had to start somewhere. We couldn't just start with these massive 30, 40, 50 people rosters. We had to start somewhere. We started small here. What we have, it's totally fine. When it comes to the sprites and general graphics, it's pretty obvious these are all reused from previous Capcom games. The X-Men characters are from X-Men Children of Adam, and Street Fighter, it looks like they're from Street Fighter Alpha 2. At the very least, they actually all blend together and it does look cohesive and nice, and the game does have a good aesthetic that still matches the Marvel comic book aesthetic that I think looks nice even nowadays. It's easy on the eyes and it's easy to understand nowadays. And the same can be said for the gameplay. It's easy to pick up and play, easy to understand. If you've ever played a fighting game, you'll be able to pick this game up just fine. It's not super stiff, it's actually pretty smooth. You'll be doing combos left and right. It actually has a nice feel to it. It's satisfying. And if you've ever played any Street Fighter or Darkstalkers or any Marvel vs. Capcom, you're going to have zero issues here. Sure, it's not as in-depth as some of the other games I just mentioned, but you're still going to be having fun with it, and that's absolutely what matters. This game introduced the team format, so you actually pick 2 characters, and the goal is to defeat the 2 characters on each team. Rather than winning both rounds, you really do just have to defeat both characters, and you can tag in and out during the middle of the match, which is always going to be a good time, and if you tag someone out after they recently took some damage, they can actually heal a little bit back. But the moment-to-moment gameplay is very similar to, say, Marvel superheroes. This game did introduce the hyper combo gauge though, which would go on to be in like all the other Marvel vs. Capcom games, and the gameplay, yeah, it's a good time. I don't really have a ton to say about it because it plays really similar to Marvel vs. Capcom. It just feels a little more scaled down. and the series would only get better from here. Speaking of, here we have Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter releasing in '97. Now, if you thought X-Men vs. Street Fighter was similar to Marvel vs. Capcom, now it's really similar to Marvel vs. Capcom. It really is just one step away from MVC. The gameplay, the aesthetics, really almost everything is basically the same as X-Men vs. Street Fighter. It's just the characters are a little different here. We have 17 playable characters again, and on the Capcom side, the Street Fighter side, it's basically exactly the same. On the Marvel side, there's Blackheart, Captain America, Cyclops, Hulk, Omega Red, Shumagorath, Spider-Man, and Wolverine. This was the game that actually introduced Omega Red to me, who I'm very excited to see in upcoming games. When it comes to the character roster, yeah, it's the same number as the previous game, but I think it is a little stronger since it's all of Marvel versus just X-Men. That's probably the wrong word. It's all of Marvel rather than just X-Men. There, that sounds nicer. It's fine for what it is. When it comes to the gameplay though, I really don't have anything to say. If you've played any Capcom fighting game from the 90s, you'll be able to pick this one up and understand it. It is really, really similar to X-Men vs. Street Fighter. And if you like that game, you're gonna like this game. I like this game just a tiny bit more because of the roster, and that's really it. Both of them are good games. They aren't anything all that special, especially because of Marvel vs. Capcom, but they're still solid enough fighting games. And here we have the original Street Fighter Alpha releasing all the way back in '95. Now, Alpha was actually the first all-new Street Fighter game produced by Capcom since the release of Street Fighter 2, and it definitely had a lot riding on it, but Alpha absolutely kicks ass. The game takes place in between Street Fighter 1 and 2 and features younger versions of some of our favorite characters, and of course the introduction of some new characters. This game has 13 characters. Obviously some of the mainstays are here: Ryu, Ken, Guile, Chun-Li, Sagat, but also Birdie and Adon coming over from the original Street Fighter. But in an interesting note, Guy, one of the characters from Final Fight, along with Saddam, show up here, and then there's two new characters, Charlie and Rose. The roster, it's okay. Obviously the other alphas have a lot bigger and stronger rosters, but for the first one, yeah, it's alright. Something you can immediately see is that the art style for this game is different from Street Fighter 2. It's a lot more like Darkstalkers and X-Men Children of the Atom, and I think it looks great. The sprites are really great, the presentation as a whole is solid, and the soundtrack, yeah, Alpha's always got some bangers. But this is a fighting game, not a fighting soundtrack, so how is the gameplay, how's the fighting? This game, it actually is pretty easy to come back and play. If you've played Street Fighter 2 really in any capacity, you'll be able to pick this up just fine. It's the most similar to Street Fighter 2, but there are some key differences here. The super combo system that was in Street Fighter 2 is a bit different here. Now it's got 3 levels to it, and as the player performs regular and special techniques, it fills up. And the higher the level, the more damage and attacks you'll pull off. In addition to the super combos, the player can actually also perform the special counterattack technique called the Alpha Counter after blocking an opponent's attack, which will use up some of the super combo gauge. This game also introduced a few other techniques like air blocking and chain combos, which are these combos that are performed by interrupting the animation of one basic move by performing another of equal or greater strength. These are all good additions. All of this really does come together to make Alpha a solid fighter. The mechanics that this game introduced are not huge. They're not game changers. They're not going to change the fundamentals of Street Fighter. They just add on what's already there. Like, if you like Street Fighter, you're going to like the fighting of this game. You're going to like Alpha. All these mechanics just add a bit more depth to the fighting itself, and these mechanics are not that hard to understand, especially if you've played any modern fighting games. And if you've played any modern fighting games, you won't really have much trouble coming back and playing this one. Like, it doesn't feel stiff, it feels very nice, it's easy to just pick up and understand. And so with all that, I think this game is worth playing. Obviously, the other alphas improved on this game a lot, especially the roster, but the original alpha, yeah, it's still a good game and it's still a fun little fighting game. And so here we have Street Fighter V, originally releasing in 2015, and if I rank these games based on when they originally released, oh boy, Street Fighter V, it might be like at the bottom of the list because I was pissed. You all know it, but I'm gonna reiterate it anyway. The launch was terrible. I got this game, yeah, at launch date and went, what is this shit? I played the game for a few days of the launch week and I didn't touch it again for years. I was just so disappointed and unhappy with that original release that I was like, no, I'm not touching this for years. And I can tell you now, years later, the game actually is pretty decent to good, has a lot of content, and has a number of good things going for it. But yeah, that launch just kind of soured me on this game permanently. So years after the release, the game actually did get a story. It takes place in between Street Fighter 4 and 3 and has Bison being, just kind of an asshole, and then all the Street Fighter characters show up, and I just never really cared too much about the story in this game. They actually do have a single player like story mode, and that is cool and all, but kind of too little too late. It's not exactly that long either. It's maybe like an hour or two. There really just isn't a ton to it. The game at least has an arcade mode. It didn't even launch with that. Can you tell I'm still salty about the launch? Like, I really am still salty about the launch. They really launched it with like training mode and a broken online. They didn't even have arcade mode. You could do like local multiplayer and that's really it. But now it has training, arcade mode, the challenges, and online mode that might work. I haven't tried it in a while. A story mode, and a much better cast of characters. When the game launched, it had 16 characters, and I mean, it was a decent base roster. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It's gotten much, much better with all the seasons, and a bunch of the fan favorites are here. But I know there are plenty of people that went, oh, I don't care about the modes or anything like that. I just want to know how the fighting itself is. I mean, the fighting is good. The fighting was always good in Street Fighter V. I mean, I didn't love it compared to, say, 4, but I thought the fighting was always good here. It's still pretty smooth. It feels nice. There's a lot of satisfying elements to it, and I do have some fond memories now with Street Fighter V playing with some friends, but I certainly didn't those first couple of years. Something new to this game is that they have the V gauge, and they have the V skills. These, I'm a bit more mixed on. I was never huge on them. I don't really think Street Fighter needed this gimmick, and I don't know how much it really added to the gameplay from a casual perspective. I'm sure, on the professional level, this probably changes shit like crazy, but I don't know. I just never really cared too much for it. But like I said, it still has that Street Fighter gameplay. If you've played like any of the games before this one, you'll be able to pick this one up and have a ton of fun, still kick some ass, whoop some butt, whatever you want to do. You can still do it here, and you can still have a good time. Did I have as much fun with this game as I have the other Street Fighters that are higher on this list? No, I didn't. Did the launch really just kind of give me an incredibly sour bias that I'm going to take to the grave? Yeah, it really did. Something else I'm going to throw out there is I hated this game's aesthetic when it came out. I thought it looked so vanilla and plain and just basic, and I was like, really? This is the best they could do? And the music was like alright. It wasn't amazing like Street Fighter Third Strike or 2, and I don't like the character design in this game. I don't really like how they look, especially Ken. What did they do to Ken? I don't know, the aesthetics, presentation, music just didn't do it for me. This game doesn't do it for me in a number of ways, but I can see all these years later it's gotten quite a bit better than it originally was, and it still does have some fun. If you love Street Fighter, you're gonna like the game, but at this current point in time, I don't really think it's worth playing, especially with Street Fighter 6 out. But if you want to go back a couple years, you got Street Fighter V. And here we have Street Fighter X Tekken releasing in 2012. Now, I was there day one for this game. I love Tekken. I really do love Tekken. I've ranked all the Tekkens on the channel, and I like Street Fighter, so I was like, this game seemed totally up my alley. And while I did enjoy it back then, I can see nowadays it does have some issues, but it was still a really fun time. So like the title implies, this is Street Fighter crossing over with the Tekken series, the 3D Tekken series I might add. So this game plays much more like Street Fighter. It's two-dimensional, and all of the Tekken characters really have been converted to play in 2D, as Tekken is a very much 3D series with its animation, movement, and just moves in general. And honestly, I think it is crazy how well so many of these Tekken characters converted to 2D and how well they play in this game. Some of my favorite Tekken characters like Kuma or Christy are still awesome in this game. I can still do combos that I would do in Tekken, and they work in this game in a totally different setting. I think that's really impressive and deserves a bunch of praise. And then of course you've got all the Street Fighter characters, which play more like, regular Street Fighter characters. Now on the subject of characters, this game's character roster goes absolutely nuts. Like, this is one of the biggest character rosters I've ever seen for a fighting game that doesn't have the word Dragon Ball in it. There's like 50 characters here, and if you're playing the PS3 version, there's some exclusives like Cole McGrath, Kuro, and Toro, Mega Man, which is the US box art Mega Man, yeah, it's fucking stupid, and Pac-Man from the Ghostly Adventures, the other fucking stupid series, and Pac-Man's in a mech, but whatever, there's a ton of characters. When it comes to the Street Fighter and the Tekken characters, they have so many of the fan favorites. Like, it's nothing but great. I really have nothing but good things to say about the roster. I absolutely do remember all the controversy though when this game came out, that the DLC was already on the disc and they were charging you extra for it, which I still think is absolutely ridiculous. But nowadays it feels like the opposite. Barely any of the game is on the disc and you just gotta download the rest of it. So I guess times have changed. But yeah, that DLC controversy, it was pretty ridiculous of Capcom to do that, and it's always gonna hurt the roster a little for me. It's always gonna hurt this game a little for me, but the roster, it's pretty freaking amazing. Now, a great roster, it doesn't mean shit if the gameplay sucks. Now, I already said that all the Tekken characters really translate very well to 2D, and they feel really nice to control. The Street Fighter characters are the same thing, really. That's great to control. But this game in general, it actually feels really nice. It's satisfying. It's easy to pick up and play. It's got all those key elements you're looking for in a more modern fighting game. And if you've played any fighting game in the last 10 years, you'll be able to play this game just fine. The game has a really heavy emphasis on the tag team mechanic. It's much more like Tekken's tag team mechanic, where if one of the players gets knocked out, then they lose the round and whoever wins 2 rounds wins. And in this game, there's a bunch of different tag mechanics. You can do more than, say, Street Fighter EX3. It's pretty awesome. I like the tag element of this game, and I like how this game deals with its supers and the cross gauge. And I think the mechanics overall were just really solid. I think the fighting was actually really solid in this game. But you know what wasn't really solid? The gem system and the Pandora mode. I never liked either of these. These gems, I thought they were just stupid when it came out. I think it's stupid now. I don't like the gems. I don't like how they're implemented. I don't like what they do. I don't like the Pandora mode either. I'd rather just have neither of these in the game, to be honest. I think without either of these and that DLC on the disc bullshit, and the game would have gotten even more praise. I think people would still really be talking about it nowadays, because I think the fighting's great, the roster's great, the presentation is excellent, there's a ton of fan service. I think it's got a bunch of unique ideas, and it is just an absolute ton of fun. Like, I've never not had a bunch of fun while playing the game, because I love Tekken. I like Street Fighter. I mean, it just works. Like, it just absolutely works, and it's a shame that the game isn't really talked about very much these days. Would I argue the game's underrated? I don't know about that, but I do think that if you like either of these series, this game is worth checking out. It is really cheap nowadays, so that's a big plus. It doesn't seem like we're ever getting the Tekken version, Tekken X Street Fighter, so I guess we just have this one to go off of at least. Hey, at least it's a good game. And so here we have Street Fighter Alpha 2 releasing originally in '96. Now, Alpha 2, what it really is a remake of the original Alpha, but it features a ton of new improvements over the original, such as new characters, attacks, stages, and a bunch of gameplay features, to the point where, yeah, I think it deserves its own entry on the list. So when it comes to the character roster, it has the 13 characters from the original game, but it has some characters coming over from Street Fighter 2, specifically Dahlzim and Zangief. It has Gen from the original Street Fighter, Rolento, who was in Final Fight, now is a Street Fighter character, and this game has the newcomer Sakura, who would go on to be a fan favorite in the Street Fighter series. Now, it's pretty clear already, but the roster is quite a bit better than the original game. I think it's actually more than solid enough, and it's arguably better than even Street Fighter 2's roster. So when it comes to the gameplay, I mean, it's obviously going to be very similar to the original Alpha. It is just kind of a remake of the original Alpha, but there are some key differences. The main new feature of this game is the inclusion of the custom combo system, which replaces those chain combos from the first Alpha. Everything else, though, from the first Alpha is still here, like air blocking. The custom combo system, though, it adds even more depth to this fighting that the chain combo system from the first game didn't have. And I won't lie with y'all, it starts to get pretty technical here. It starts to go over my head. The depth, it's real here with this one. But the gameplay is actually really solid. There are a lot of people who still really love Alpha 2 and play this even over Alpha 3. And there's a reason, because Alpha 2, it still whoops ass. It's still a really good game. It's got a good roster. It's still really satisfying. It's easy to pick up and play, but the game absolutely has depth and legs, and is not only a great Street Fighter game, but it's just a great fighting game in general that I have no problem recommending, especially if you like Street Fighter or the first Alpha. I totally think it's worth playing. It is better than the original Alpha. It kind of makes the original Alpha low-key obsolete. I mean, the game looks better, it runs better, it's got more depth, more characters, the music still slaps, and I really got no problem recommending this game to any fighting game fans. And so here we have Street Fighter 2, initially releasing in '91, but has since had many re-releases and updates. For this video, I am playing the latest version on the Nintendo Switch, which is Ultra Street Fighter 2, the Final Challengers, but I have tried a bunch of other versions of Street Fighter 2 thanks to the Anniversary Collection. And you know, before you start disagreeing with me which version I should be playing of SF2, we can all agree this. It doesn't really matter what version of SF2 you're playing, they're all way better than the original Street Fighter. Street Fighter 2 is a huge improvement on the original Street Fighter, importantly in its controls. Its controls, its cast of characters, how you play through the game, its balancing, its speed, really just everything has been improved on the original Street Fighter to just completely make the original game obsolete. When it comes to the game's premise, you know, it's not all that different from the original Street Fighter, and it's kind of generic honestly for a fighting game, but Street Fighter kind of established this generic trend for fighting games where it's really just about a fighting tournament. It's set up by M. Bison, really the series antagonist, and he really just wants to find the best fighter to brainwash them and have them work for him, and whichever character you choose doesn't really agree with that, and they end up kicking the crap out of Bison also. And speaking of characters, we have a lot more to play as than just Ryu and Ken. There's E. Honda, there's Blanca, there's Guile, there's Chun-Li, there's Zangief, Dhalsim, Balrog, Vega, Sagat, and of course Bison himself. That's just the original cast. The later versions would add a bunch more characters like T-Hawk, Fei Long, DJ, Cammy, and the new Switch version even adds Evil Ryu and Violent Ken, which is just a meme at this point. But yeah, character roster is just legendary. It's awesome. All the characters feel very different from each other, and the way that a lot of these characters play really was established all the way back here. Of course, there's been some tweaks for some of the characters, but it's kind of crazy to see how many of the characters really still play almost the same all these years later. The controls, like I mentioned, so much better than the first game. Not stiff as shit. It's actually easy to pick up and play and understand, hard to master, all that yada yada, but you can pick this game up in modern day and still have a great time with it, and you won't be complaining, oh, this feels so outdated, this is so clunky, this is horrible to play. Of course, you know, there's going to be some age with it, but I still think it's more than playable nowadays. And if you're picking it up these days, you're probably playing with a buddy. Street Fighter 2 really sold the idea of beating the crap out of your friend and them doing the same to you in the multiplayer. You know, Street Fighter 2 multiplayer, what's there really to add at this point to the conversation? It's legendary for a reason. There's a reason this game has been re-released as many times as it has. It's because it's so beloved. It's such a great fighting game. You could still pick it up, do some combos, beat some ass, and have a great time. If you haven't played Street Fighter 2 at this point, I really think it is one of those games probably everyone should try at some point. I mean, there's so many versions of it too. Like, you really got no excuse for not trying Street Fighter 2 at least once. And here we have Street Fighter Alpha 3 releasing originally in '98. Now with Alpha 3, it's pretty easy to assume this, but it's true. The game is a follow-up and an improvement on Street Fighter Alpha 2. The roster is a pretty decent improvement on Alpha 2. Like, it really is one of the best rosters the Street Fighter series has ever seen. Not only does it have like everybody from Alpha 2, but it has a bunch of the fan favorites and some new characters here that would go on to continue to be fan favorites. Like, it's just a great roster. Then depending on the version, there might be even more characters, with the PSP version having 39, yes, 39 characters. But I mean, all of this wouldn't matter if the fighting wasn't very good. But I mean, it's this high on the list, so it's pretty obvious that the fighting is pretty solid in this game. So Street Fighter Alpha 3 has this totally new system with playing styles known as isms. There are 3 isms to choose from, and each one of these is actually incredibly different from the last, not only changing the controls, but just kind of how the fighting is in general. There is A-ism, which is based on the previous Alpha games, in which the player has a 3-level super combo with access to several super combo moves. But then there's X-ism, which is a simple style based on Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And with this style, the player only has a single super combo gauge and access to a single but very powerful super combo move. Then the third style, V-ism, is a unique style that allows the player to perform custom combos similar to Street Fighter Alpha 2, but you actually cannot use super combos. And then there's actually just a bunch of other variables across the 3 isms that make them all incredibly different, and all 3 modes have variations of movesets for each character, adding just nothing but a ton of depth. Like, this game just has an ass load of depth. This is one of the most in-depth fighting games just of them all. Like, this large of a roster with 3 play styles each, like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, yeah, there's a lot of depth and there's a lot of strategy going on here. And on top of all of this, the game also introduces a guard power gauge, which depletes over time if the player blocks a lot, and, you know, eventually the guard can be broken here. Really, what I'm just trying to say is that Street Fighter Alpha 3 goes so hard with its depth. Like, it's one of the most in-depth fighting games ever made, not even close. It's like up there with Third Strike, and so much of it just flies over my head. Like, I tried to understand some of it, but at a certain point I was like, man, this shit is complicated. The thing is though, is I don't think it's so complicated that you can't understand it. A normal player can still pick this game up and have some fun. You might have to mess around with the isms for a little bit to figure out which one suits your playstyle, but I generally think that you'll be able to figure it out, especially if you're really familiar with Street Fighter at all. If you're familiar with like the history of Street Fighter and how some of these characters have played in the past, I think you're really going to enjoy this, as there's a lot of callbacks and throwbacks, and the game kind of feels almost like a love letter to like all of Street Fighter. And this was like in the late 90s too, before like everyone started idolizing how great fighting games used to be. So while yes, the game can be a little stiff, it can take some time to get used to, and there's a considerable amount of depth, the game is still a ton of fun. The game has a great roster of characters. It looks and sounds amazing. The sprite work is superb. It was a big step up from Alpha 2 and Street Fighter 2, and it's one of the best Street Fighter games, and it has its own unique gimmick. No other Street Fighter game has this, really. And so it has a unique identity even all these years later. And if you have not tried it and you claim to like Street Fighter, well, I think it really is worth trying. I think you're rather inclined to like it. I was rather inclined to like it too. I'm not even going to try to pretend to understand a lot of this game's mechanics in depth, like past a surface level, and I can still really appreciate what this game is trying to do and just how good of a time it is. It also is hard as fuck in the arcade mode. But there's also a reason so many people are still playing Alpha 3, because the depth is low-key endless with so many characters and possibilities and capabilities. Like, yeah, it's a really good time, and anybody that likes fighting games, casual, competitive, doesn't really matter. I think you're going to enjoy the game, and I think it's worth trying. And so here we have Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, releasing originally in '99, but has had several re-releases since then. So like the title implies, this is the third version of Street Fighter 3. I think most people, hopefully most people, can agree that the best version of Street Fighter 3, really the only version of Street Fighter 3 you need to play, is Third Strike, which is why I'm counting that as the Street Fighter 3 game. Now Street Fighter 3 had a ton of new characters. In fact, almost all of the characters were new, and then the same goes for Second Impact. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, it has a couple returning characters, but it's still mostly new to create a pretty awesome roster that's very unique from all the other Street Fighter games. And some of these characters are just weird, like Q and 12. Like, when are we going to get some actual names for some characters? Anyway, stupid joke aside, we've got a pretty good roster here of characters that's, again, really unique and strange for Street Fighter. Now, when it comes to the actual gameplay, Third Strike has been heralded as really the most technical Street Fighter game of them all, and it's the most technical Street Fighter. The fighting mechanics are some of the deepest fighting mechanics you will find in any video game, and it's crazy how long ago this game came out and it's still this deep. And not only is it this deep, it's been kind of unmatched, especially with the parry system and the guard parries and then the character roster and just knowing all the matchups and all. No, Third Strike is pretty much unparalleled when it comes to how deep the fighting is. And you know, from a professional perspective, yeah, this is probably like the best Street Fighter thanks to how deep it is and just how involved the gameplay is and how much mind games go on here. But I'm looking at this from a casual perspective, and I gotta say, you know, Third Strike, it's a blast. There's a lot of great stuff to it, but this game, it can be a bit hard to pick up and play, especially compared to the other Street Fighter games. Like, it can be rather intimidating actually, because there's so much going on and there's so much to learn and master, and it takes a lot of practice to get even half decent at this game, way more than the other Street Fighter games. And, you know, again, I'm just a casual player. I'm sure a bunch of hardcores will come in the comments and tell me Third Strike's the best. You don't know what you're talking about, but from a casual perspective, it's a bit isolating. It's a bit hard to get into this game if you haven't been playing it a ton. And playing it with people who have been playing it even a little bit, you're just going to get your ass whooped. Like, don't get me wrong, if you play this game enough, you obviously are going to get pretty decent at it. You'll understand its mechanics, and it becomes incredibly satisfying. Even just pulling off like one parry correctly or one guard parry correctly is satisfying, let alone being able to block someone special or something crazy like that. And yeah, I have had a number of good matches and good times with this game, but it certainly felt like there was a hurdle to overcome to just even understanding this game's mechanics. And, you know, it's a 90s fighting game. It doesn't exactly do a great job explaining all of that to you. See, what doesn't need an explanation though is this game's presentation. This game looks amazing. Like, it is aged amazingly, and it's one of the best sprite-based video games I've ever seen presentation-wise. Like, it is absolutely fantastic. The animation, the characters, the stages, it is all superb here. The music, oh, it's so good too. The music is really good in this game. I love the music of Third Strike. The presentation is just gold. It's gold in this game. All in all, when it comes to Third Strike, I think it is worth trying, especially if you've played other Street Fighter games, games, but I would not recommend this as a first game. Absolutely not. I think you should play at least a couple Street Fighter games before you try Third Strike, thanks to, again, its depth, its mechanic, and just how hard it can be to get into this game. But if you really do get into this game, I can assure you it is one of the most rewarding experiences you'll have with any fighting game. And that's why, again, I have no problem recommending it, just not as your first Street Fighter. And that music, man, that jazz, that funk, oh, the music, I could go all day about the music. It's so good in this game. But this game, really great time. And so here we have Street Fighter 4, initially releasing all the way back in 2008, but has seen many re-releases just like the rest of the series, with the latest being Ultra Street Fighter 4 in 2014. Now, Street Fighter 4, I played a little bit in the mid-2000s when it became Super Street Fighter 4, but I really got more into it in the early 2010s, and then eventually when Ultra came out, that's what I played quite a bit of. Now, Street Fighter 4, I know some people might groan seeing it this high on the list, but I love Street Fighter 4. So this game does have a story. I think it takes place after Street Fighter 2, but before 5, and sees Bison surviving and having another Street Fighter tournament. And you know what, the story, who really cares too much about the story of Street Fighter 4? It's never been the most involved. You know, every character has their own little story when you play the arcade mode, and these are better than whatever overall arcing narrative that Street Fighter 4 was trying to tell. Anyway, let's talk about the roster here, because the roster in Street Fighter 4, especially Ultra Street Fighter 4, it's the best roster of any Street Fighter game, not even close. And it's one of the reasons this game is so high, because the roster just goes nuts. The roster goes insane. It goes sicko mode. It goes every positive adjective you can think of. It has so many characters. Like, this game has a stupid amount of characters. It has more characters, I'm pretty sure, than any other Street Fighter game. Street Fighter X Tekken has a lot of characters, but in terms of just Street Fighter, yeah, this game has the most characters of any of the games. Like, all the fan favorites are here except my man Q, RIP Q. His days are done, it seems. But no, seriously, there are so many characters here, so many good characters, so many classic characters, a ton of new characters that have become iconic. Like, characters. That's really what I can say about Ultra Street Fighter 4. It's probably the biggest positive because there's just such a wide range of characters. But anyway, let's talk the fighting. The gameplay is a lot more like Street Fighter 2 than anything Street Fighter 3 was doing. This game does not have the depth or technical prowess, I guess, that Street Fighter 3 Third Strike had with all of its parries and all of that stuff. There's a few things carried over like the grabs, but it plays a lot more like Street Fighter 2, and the game is a lot more casual, and I'm sure some people didn't really care that, yeah, the gameplay and the fighting mechanics are a bit simplified and dumbed down compared to Third Strike, but in all fairness, you can pick up the game and have fun with it. Anyone can pick up the game pretty much and have fun with it versus Third Strike, which certainly could have been a bit more alienating. I like that you can actually just pick up Street Fighter 4 and have fun no matter what your skill level is. Obviously, though, there is a ton of depth here. It's a Street Fighter game, and I mean, there's been pro tournaments forever for this game for a reason. It's because the fighting is good, it's satisfying, it's got a good flow to it. The game still does have a decent amount of depth. Just really nothing touches Third Strike in terms of the depth, but the game is still incredibly fun. This game's main gimmick, I guess, was the focus attacks, which is this move that allows the player to absorb an attack and basically launch a counterattack. It's this big, slow attack, and you know, from a casual perspective, it might not seem all that great, but I've seen some real technical stuff done in the professional setting with this one, so I'm not going to totally discount it. I think it's fine. I don't think it disrupts the gameplay or changes Street Fighter's core gameplay. The game still, again, plays pretty similar to Street Fighter 2, and I think it's a decent addition. I feel like that might be a hot take, but I'm pretty sure everyone can disagree on something with Street Fighter. But what I think most people won't disagree on is that the presentation is pretty solid in this game. I know there's a lot of people who prefer the sprite-based look of like Third Strike, and don't get me wrong, the sprite work is amazing in that game, but I really like the style and aesthetic of Street Fighter 4. It feels like 2 really brought to 3D. I like how it looks. I think the music's pretty great, and I'm really just picking up what this game's putting down. You know, I've really loved Street Fighter 4 for a long time and will continue to love it. It's just a really great game, and it's one of my favorite fighting games probably of all time, and I have zero problem recommending it. Even if you haven't played a Street Fighter game, this is a great entry point. You can start with Street Fighter 4. Just an all-around great time. And I'm shocked that it's not like my top Street Fighter game. But then we have the recently released Street Fighter 6, and all I gotta say is, damn. Like, damn. This game has just absolutely blown me away in just about every aspect, and I can't believe here it is as my top Street Fighter game, really, Street Fighter 6. Now, obviously, I'm going to preface, we don't know the longevity of this game. We don't know how it's going to look in a couple years, and so it could change, and I don't know, they could totally mess something up. But, from this original release already of Street Fighter 6, it's just fantastic. It is just absolutely fantastic. Street Fighter 6 is like the most complete Street Fighter release like ever, and this is the initial release, not like the 10th release of the game. Like, I am just like, holy crap, this game is just amazing right off the bat. It feels like they just got everything absolutely right, like on the first try too, with a really robust, in-depth story mode that actually has a lot of length to it, with an awesome online hub and battle system, and then it has all the staples that single player Street Fighter games would have, like the arcade, the practice, the training, the challenges, all of that. And the fighting mechanics are not only really user friendly, probably the most user friendly of any Street Fighter game, but it seems like there's still a ton of depth here that, I don't know if I'd say it rivals Third Strike, but it's certainly up there. It's definitely more in depth than 5 and 4. Now, I think the best place to start when talking about Street Fighter is the fighting. The fighting is just fantastic in this game. Not only does it feel incredible and it feels amazing, it's really smooth, it's satisfying, and it's just great to control. One of the best controlling fighting games I've ever seen. And with the controls, they actually have two control schemes here. You've got your classic Street Fighter controls where it's the 6-button layout, but they actually have a simplified 4-button version that's called Modern Controls. And at first I was a bit like, is this like the easy mode from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite? But no, this is actually legit. This is actually a legit way to play, and it doesn't cripple you, it doesn't make you stupid OP, you're not going to get owned by somebody who's on classic controls. I mean, that might happen anyway, but I think Modern is actually a very viable option here, and it's great for people who haven't played a ton of Street Fighter or aren't super familiar with fighting games. In fact, this is like the most inviting fighting game I've ever played, where it's like, you got no skill here, try this game because it will make you a fan, and I love that. I want as many people to play these fighting games as possible, and this game is just incredibly inviting to the genre. And then there's actually some depth. This game does have some mechanics to it that harken back to Third Strike, like the introduction of the drive gauge. You've got your super down below, but this is unrelated actually. The drive gauge can basically be seen as your stamina. So when you do a parry, which yes, parries actually return here, it uses the drive gauge. There's also what is basically a focus attack. It uses the drive gauge. If you use all of it up, then you actually take chip damage while blocking, and you can't use any of these moves. And I think the drive gauge is a great addition. It's a good gimmick for Street Fighter. It doesn't feel out of place. It doesn't feel like it's taking over. It doesn't feel weird like the V stuff. And it just adds so much depth to this game. At least it feels like it. We'll see in the long run if it actually does, but I am a huge fan of these systems. I think they're both great, and they're both great mechanics to have here, and it really adds a new layer to Street Fighter that we haven't seen yet. And then we have the characters. I think the character roster, it's actually pretty solid. It's certainly better than 5's. In fact, just about everything's better than 5's. I think the roster's good. There's a lot of the classics here. There's a couple new ones here, and I like everybody. Everybody plays super different, and I was actually able to pick up a bunch of characters I've never been good at before and use them with the modern control scheme and actually whoop some ass. Characters like Jury. And I gotta say, I felt pretty cool while doing it. But aside from that, I really do like the character roster, and I'm gonna just say the aesthetic, the presentation, the music in this game. Oh, it is so good. I love how this game looks. I love how it sounds. Love the aesthetic. Like, it's just fantastic from a presentation standpoint. And then the game actually has a character creator. You get to make your own character. You can make a monstrosity. As you can see, I made a monstrosity. It was just horrifying to look at. But for some reason, I seem to be right at home with the other monstrosities here. Eventually, I did change it because I felt physically ill looking at my character and made something that looks normal. And what do you do with this character? You actually have a whole ass story mode to play through. Finally, we get some real single player content to Street Fighter, more than an hour story mode or the arcade mode, which the arcade mode is here, and arcade mode is cool and all, and training's great, and the challenges are great, but we have a whole ass story mode here. There's like an actual story, which, it's pretty Street Fighter. Tournaments, some classic characters, some conflict. I mean, it's nothing really special, the story is, but this game is so unhinged. Like, Street Fighter's always been pretty unhinged, but like seeing it in this fully fleshed single player mode, yeah, you really see how unhinged it is. And this single player mode is like Yakuza, where there's actually like a whole map to explore. There's like side objectives, there's like main missions, there's collectibles. You can customize your character, like I said. There's RPG mechanics where you level up your stats and your skills and learn new moves. You actually get to really customize your character's movesets as you learn new moves from characters like Chun-Li and Ryu, Ken. All of the classics are here. And you get into fights with random mooks on the street. The gameplay is much more like a beat 'em up like Final Fight here, and Final Fight is playable in the hub area, but yeah, it's a lot more like Final Fight where you just beat everything up rather than being a traditional fighting game, and it actually really works. I think the single player is actually great in this game. There's a bunch to explore, and it's got a really good length to it. It's got well over 10 to 15 hours of gameplay in the single player alone for a fighting game. That's the most of like any fighting game. Like maybe like Mortal Kombat Deception comes kind of close, but that game wasn't very good. This is actually good. Now, is the single player gameplay, you know, the story mode, the best gameplay ever? No. I won't lie, it does get pretty repetitive, especially by the end, and there's a ton of annoying ass enemies like the fridge and the drones. These can just fuck right off. I hated fighting these, but I mean, this gameplay for the most part is still excellent. It's a great time, and exploring the city was actually really cool, and I'm like shocked that they actually put this in the game. I had no idea this was like going to be in the game. Maybe I wasn't watching the marketing enough, but I was like, damn, there's a full ass story mode here. This is cool. But I know there are plenty of people that probably won't even ever try it. And then we have the online and the battle hub. I really like the battle hub system where you can just kind of vibe with your friends in here and mess around with other Street Fighter games and just, again, hang out. It's cool. And then the online battles, they're great. I've never had any issues with the online battles that weren't of my own. Like my internet shitting out, thank you Xfinity, but like when it comes to this game's connectivity and stability, when it comes to the online, it's been nothing but fantastic, and I've already had a ton of great matches and a ton of fun with Street Fighter 6, and I expect to have a ton of fun with this game for years. Like, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but this game is just superb, and I have zero problem recommending this game to anybody who likes fighting games, Street Fighter. It's just excellent. And that's it for today's video. We talked a bunch of Street Fighter. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know down below what you think. Like, share, sub, all that great stuff. And see you later. Bye-bye now.